I really do have a true God-given, grace-given love for His Word. And I noticed in those early days, people would come in and use language that I really wasn't that confident about. Dennis is right here in the red shirt. Anyone else? Sam's got a Bible if you'd like it. Relax. I'd rather have it. Okay, good. Thanks. Wonderful. I want you to have it today. I'm going to be in a couple of different places primarily, but just love studying the Bible. And really, at the end of the day, folks, if there's a confession here, that's really all I am is kind of a Bible teacher. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that I'm a Bible teacher. Some people have said the only difference between teaching and preaching is how loud you raise your voice in certain places. Wave your hands a little bit more than teachers usually do, and that serves maybe so, I don't know, but I love this. I love coming to the Word of God and seeing what it says to us today. But it also notes to me that it can be kind of confusing. It really can. It's not put together like other books are, and sometimes I read through it, and I feel like it says the same thing over and over again sometimes. And so I'm just kind of pausing for a little bit of a Bible lesson, understanding your Bibles a little bit by giving it in some broad strokes. Particularly what I want to introduce to you today is just the thought that God says some things in one part of the Bible, like if I turn around and face the same direction that you are, it would be back here in my Bible. See, if I'm this way, it looks like I'm. But sometimes God will say things like back here in His Bible about maybe what's happening in the life of people that He's talking about. Sometimes He'll say things back here in the back of the Bible that He wants to bring up later on again. Sometimes He'll say some things back here in the Bible, back here, that He's actually going to do in the future. It's a long time away before He's going to do it. Moreover, we're going to talk about some things today that sometimes God does this. Sometimes God says something back here that later on in the Bible He's going to bring it up again with some greater clarity and more explanation. But still, both of those occasions are talking about something that's still going to happen not only in the future as far as the Bible is concerned, in the future as far as you and I are concerned. And that can be confusing. That can be confusing. And so we talk about it in different kinds of language, and we church people need to recognize not everybody understands that. So maybe back here where he brings it up, we would use the word prophecy. We would say that there are prophets in the Bible, and the prophet has spoken something. He has prophesied something. Now in this case, we're going to bring up Daniel. We're back at Daniel. Now Daniel had a contemporary. His name was Ezekiel. They lived and ministered during the same period of time. So Daniel and Ezekiel are going to say some things right here. That when we get to the New Testament, they're in the Old Testament, when we get to the New Testament and we go into places like the Gospels, not prophecy, but Gospels. The Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the New Testament. So they prophesied. Then certain things are going to happen and even be spoken about even more in the Gospels. But those things are still yet to occur in the life of the church, or maybe even into the future, even as far as you and I are concerned. And sometimes, I realize there are people sitting here right now who are saying, okay, kind of get on with it here. But believe it or not, there was a time when I was, not understanding how that was put together, and still it can be a little confusing. For instance, now, Ezekiel back here with Daniel's partner, he's back here. And one of the things that Ezekiel says in chapter 33 of his book is, he's speaking to speaking to the preachers and the leaders of the people during his day in chapter 33. And he says this, and again, Buz paraphrase, if I can do this for you. He said, now preachers and teachers of the word, you're kind of like a guy standing on the wall of the city. And you're looking out, and there's an enemy coming. Now, preachers, I want you to understand something. That it's your responsibility to warn the people that an enemy is coming. And so if you warn the people that an enemy is coming, and they don't listen to you, their own blood is upon their head. In other words, they'll sacrifice the responsibility of not listening to you. But preachers, teachers of the Word, if you see an enemy coming, and you don't warn the people, that blood is going to be on you. That is, it's going to be your responsibility. And he says this in chapter 33. In other words, he gives the responsibility of the leaders at that time to warn the people. History tells us about Winston Churchill. That's why his picture's on that screen as well. Churchill had probably been in politics for 30 years before World War II actually broke out in the late 30s. In fact, by 1929, 1930, Churchill had begun to be on the periphery of political acceptance in Great Britain. He wasn't the prime minister. He was just somebody who kept coming in and saying, "You guys better pay attention." Saying to his own countrymen, to the politicians, "You people need to watch out for an enemy that is rising to our east." And he even took on this name, the warmonger. Nobody paid attention. But by 1934, 35, 36, it's a Churchill again. He's kind of back. He was just being ostracized for always bringing this sort of thing up. In the mid-30s, he spoke to his daughter. This is how deeply he felt about this. He spoke to his daughter, who was engaged to an Austrian. His name was Vic Olivier, like Laurence Olivier. Vic Olivier. He was an Austrian. And they had intended to get married and move to the U.S., move to the United States. And he told his daughter this. He said, "You do not marry that man until he has secured American..." Thank you. Our agent just got to... Until he's attained American citizenship. You don't marry him. Because in about 3 years' time, if you do that, he's going to be an enemy and I won't be able to protect you anymore. I mean, he felt it that deeply. And yet people still didn't listen to it. I've got a little quote here that I want to show to you because in 1938, as late as 1938, at the Munich Pact, which was a place to go to try and negotiate with Hitler, as if somebody thought that they could actually do that sort of thing, if you could negotiate with such a man. But they thought, well, we can go and we can talk it over with him and we can get him to change his position. And all the time, Churchill is saying, that's an impossibility. And they learned the truth. Their head did come out of the sand a year later, in 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland. In 1933, though, back up, rewind. In 1933, Winston Churchill continued to try and warn his people. He said, "Only a few hours away live some 70 million of the most industrious, scientific, educated people in the world, who are being taught from childhood of war and death and battle is the glorious fate of men. There is a nation that has abandoned all its liberties in order to coordinate its collective threat. There is a nation with all its strength and virtue. It is in the grip of ruthless men preaching a gospel of intolerance and racial pride, unrestrained by law or by parliament or by public opinion. From their new tables of commandments they have omitted, "Thou shalt not kill." And readied in their hands are new weapons of the air, of which Churchill said, "Our Navy has no defense. Nay, and with it still has come a new method of brutish barbarism, namely the possibility of compelling the submission of races by terrorizing and torturing their civil population." And now, in the face of these facts, I ask you, what are we to do? What are we to do? And that was in 1933, 6 years before they would actually do anything. The preacher in today's pulpit has the same responsibility that Ezekiel spoke to us about. To stand on the wall and to look out there and to recognize that indeed there is an enemy. Perhaps it is an enemy of a different sort today than Daniel and Ezekiel spoke about, even what Churchill spoke about. And yet we look around our own culture, our own society. We look at Washington and we see some certain things that are being done. And in reminiscent to Daniel and Ezekiel, Dave sent me this quote from D.A. Carson. Listen to this as we move now into our contemporary scene. "The Judeo-Christian heritage of Western nations was until recent decades so strong that many Christians were shielded from the scorn. In Daniel's day, in Ezekiel's day, that prophet who stood on that wall was scorned and derided and ignored, like a Churchill." Oh, is that Churchill again? And Carson says just this week to us that Judeo-Christian heritage of the Western nations was, until recent decades, so strong that many Christians were shielded from such scorn. No more. It doesn't say it twice, but I'm going to say it twice. No more. We had better get used to what our brothers and sisters in Christ in other lands and other centuries have handled better than we. Do you need proof? Well, this just passed a couple of weeks ago, Andrew Grossman in the Wall Street Journal writes this. "The new Congress to be sworn in on Thursday will be the most diverse ever. The 113th Congress to be sworn in will be the most diverse ever, with women, minorities, and gays making large gains in a shift that underscore the political effect and changing demographics and social mores. In addition to the greater minority makeup across Congress, the House will have as its first member a Hindu, its first female combatant veterans, and its first open bisexual member. The Senate will have its first Buddhist." My metaphor that's in my brain, when I think about Ezekiel or Daniel, or I think about Churchill, or I think about trying to bring the impact of this to you, is as a boy, I do remember the places where we had snow this time of the year. And we get up at the top of a hill and we kind of collect enough snow together to kind of pack it like this and to make the biggest round ball for the bottom of our snowman, and kind of had to collect together. You kind of had to force it to turn over just at first, and maybe then turn it cockeyed and turn it a little bit that way, and then again cockeyed so that it gets round, not just kind of square. It molded. But then as we got down the hill a little bit further, it was a little easier, and and it would go a little quicker. By the time we got down there, it was just a boulder. I could imagine that, how can you do this in Boynton Beach, Florida? I mean, what is it, January the 13th, huh? I mean, it's freezing outside. Last few weeks I wore a jacket. We had a little winter storm. Maybe we'll get a snap. We usually get a little something. But we've got it pretty nice. How can you bring a message? How can you warn people? Do you feel threatened? Do you feel endangered? I somehow want to take the role of an Ezekiel or a Churchill, or just as a pastor standing in a pulpit saying, how can I impress upon you the need for this? So I've already mentioned to you, it's done in the Bible, structured it out. We even had some graphics a few weeks ago. Take a look at these. And it's my attempt to take some of the challenging things about the Bible and simplify them in some ways. And so I use silly pictures sometimes, like creation. People created there, and calling out Abraham, the Chaldees, you see, and kings and prophets like David. He was a shepherd. That little figure there is supposed to be like David. Then we come to that prophet, that red guy there. That's a prophet standing in the midst of people. Those arrows are supposed to help you demonstrate that he is speaking to people during his time, but he's also speaking to people future on that will happen. The cross is to represent the life of Christ. And then that little house, kind of steeple thing, well, that's to represent the church. So if you're wondering in the biblical story where you are, that's where you are. You're in that church. Well, where we're moving now in talking about sending out that clarion call, that warning to us, where we are now, is trying to let you know what happens to that church. What happens to that church building? And so I open up my Bible to Daniel chapter 9. If you have your Bible, let's all turn to Daniel chapter 9. And we're going to be in Daniel chapter 9. That's that back part, back there in the prophecy. But as we move forward, we're also going to be in Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. And I hope that won't confuse you now after this introduction, because I believe that what Daniel is talking about in Daniel chapter 9, Matthew is also talking about in chapter 24. Now once again, look at me. Both of these two, Daniel and Matthew, are going to talk about something that's still future, for the most case, for us. And that's what's happening, so I don't want you to be confused, although it's easy for me to be confused about it. But, again, let's take a look now at Daniel chapter 9. And let me see where I'd like to begin. I think I'd like to just go ahead and begin at verse 24. There's a variety of places that we'll look at, but right now I just want you to see this. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. Now, in prophetic language, most of the time we think that there are some figures of speech going on. We know that it wasn't 70 weeks that they were in captivity, for those who don't know, but 70 years. And so we believe that Daniel is using 1 week in prophetic language as 1 year. So you can almost read that 70 weeks as 70 years are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgressions, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Now therefore understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks, then for 62 weeks it shall be built again, and square and moat, but in a troubled time. And after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall come, be cut off, and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolation are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, And for a half of the week he shall put an end to the sacrifice of offering, and on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. You can see how I kind of wanted to slow things down and try and make them a little bit simpler. If that prophetic week is actually a year, then we're talking about, instead of 69 weeks, 69 sets of 7-year periods. It's a long period of time. And I don't have a chalkboard and a design today. It's something that would be done in a classroom setting. But it's very clear that when we look at the calendar and we structure it, that indeed what Daniel is talking about is the coming of Jesus Christ. That many years between them fits exactly. And so what Daniel is talking about is when Jesus comes. And then there's a break. And then there's going to be one more week that's left. And then he says in the middle of that week, something terrible, some abomination of desolation is going to happen in the middle of that week. And so what I've done is I've tried to take the top line of the graph that you see, where you see the church, and I've tried to bring it down and expand it so that you see where the cross is. That church that just moved up there, that church that moves up there is the inauguration, the beginning of that 1 week that's coming, that bad things are going to happen, that the Bible calls a tribulation period. Terrible things are going to go on during that time. And Daniel is highlighting something that happens in the middle of it. Now, there is a viewpoint, though, that's just shown like that little graphic, that at the very beginning of that terrible time, that 7-year period of time, that the church just escapes it. The believers in Jesus Christ will not be present during that terrible time. On the other hand, there are those people who are going to read Daniel and say, well, wait a minute now, I'm reading Daniel, and it says that about the flood that's there, and he shall make a strong covenant with many, and then it says, for 1 week, and for a half a week he shall put an end to the sacrifice of offerings. And so it causes people to say, well, it doesn't sound like to me that the church is out of there at the beginning of it. Sounds like to me that Daniel's trying to highlight for us that at least we're going to go through half of it, and at the middle this desolation thing happens. And so instead of the church going out at this point, the next slide shows that it goes halfway through and the church goes out in the middle. And then we read further on that you and I are going to delve into this in just a moment from Matthew chapter 24. But then there are those who said, no, wait a minute. Who's Daniel talking to? Who's Matthew talking to? And see that, wow, these things are bad are going to happen, and then something worse is going to happen in the middle, and then something worse is going to happen after that, and things are going to be even worse than they were in the first 3.5. They're worse the second 3.5. And then Jesus is coming back. And so there are people who think that no, the church lives all the way through it and is not taken out until the end of it. Now, what's my point in this Bible teaching time together? Well, my point is to be as accurate as I believe that I need to be. And these are wonderful, faithful people who believe these different things. But you should know that your pastor is all the way down at that end, not at this end. And with that conviction, I find a responsibility to be an Ezekiel, to be a Daniel, to be, if you will, a Churchill, to be a pastor who says, we need to be warned. We need to understand our times in which we live, and we need to heed that warning. So in the next few minutes, I want to unpack my case. I want to go from Daniel to Matthew, back to Daniel, back to Matthew, back to Daniel, back to Matthew. I want to do it under a few headings here that you have in your bulletin there that you can take some notes about. And let's do a little Bible lesson. Why the persecution? Why even study eschatology? Why study the end times? May I say this, first of all, it's not in the sermon notes, so don't get nervous, but don't forget that eschatology, the study of last things, the end times, is a part of the gospel. In fact, some might even confess, experientially anyway, the best part of the gospel. That's the glorification. That's when we're united. That's when we inaugurate our eternity in the literal presence of Jesus Christ in that relationship. That's part of the gospel. And so, wow, it's important to God. It's important to us. Well, as we look at this, why study? I think that we need to understand the persecution that's going on in the text. Now, once again, let me go back to Daniel. I'm back in chapter 9 where you still are. And to say to you that Daniel chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12, in sharper detail through that text, deal with this period. So we're not going to go verse by verse through 10, 11, and 12. I'm just going to kind of use it where it fits in the description here for you. So, for instance, I look at Daniel chapter 10, verse 27. 9:27. Chapter 9, verse 27. We've already read it once, but here it is again. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So this is the one who comes who's going to make desolation. Terrible things are going to be happening. People are going to be persecuted. Turn over a page to chapter 11, verse 31. Chapter 11, verse 31 in Daniel says this. In 11:31. Forces from him, this is the evil one, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set the abomination that makes desolate. In other words, an evil force is going to move in. They're going to move into Jerusalem, going to destroy the city, and they're going to set up an idol, set up a statue, set up something in the temple that he is describing here as something that makes desolate, an abomination. 12:1. If I turn over again in my Bible to chapter 12 of Daniel, verse 1. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered. And so there's trouble coming, says Daniel. Now, quickly. In fact, what I would suggest you to do is go over to Matthew 24 and just kind of put your finger there and keep it there, because we're going to be going back and forth. Matthew chapter 24. Where's Matthew? Okay. 24. Now, it's what Frank read for us earlier. This is actually a description of that troubled period. This is a description of that 1 week time. And so I want to call your attention to it. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon, in verse 29. Excuse me, I apologize. I meant to start at verse 15. So let's go back to 24:15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, that's why I wanted to read it. You see what I said earlier? Ezekiel is talking about something. The Gospels, and even here in the Gospel, is referring back to Daniel. So he's telling us that. What is he telling us that? Well, he says, when you see these things. So let's back up and look at verse 9 to see what he's talking about. Verse 9. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. Well, wait a minute. Frank didn't read something. So I go back to the beginning of the chapter, chapter 24, and verse 1. And this is what my Bible says. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will be." Who came to him? So I read 9 again. "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all the nations for my name's sake." Who's he talking to? And so we read in verse 15, terrible things that are happening. Then in 15, now where was the abomination of desolation according to Daniel? Was it back here at the beginning? It was here in the middle, wasn't it? In the middle, when half of the week was gone. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee it. On and on he gives descriptions about it. But hey, check it out. Verse 22. "And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of who? But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." Now, unless you're somebody who wants to divide the text between different kinds of disciples, disciple A over here is one kind, disciple B is over here, another kind of disciple. And you want to call disciple A elect people, and disciples over here just disciples. And you want to say, okay, well that just pertains to the elect description. Unless you're dividing the disciples like that, he's talking to all of his disciples. I don't divide them. And so I'm simply saying to you, he says, it's going to be so bad that unless those bad days have been cut short, everyone would be destroyed. But for the sake of God's people, he indeed did cut them short. Well, then that must be the end. That must be the end of the description of the bad times at that point, would you not think? But look what Matthew does. "For false Christs and prophets will arise," in verse 24. "They'll lead many astray." Wow, check it out. Just what I was trying to teach you at the outset of my introduction. Look what Jesus explicitly says in verse 25. "See, I have told you beforehand." Look here. Daniel and Ezekiel said it here on the room. Matthew said it here. But it's really Christ who is speaking to his disciples. And he's saying to them, I've told you this beforehand, because it's still yet to happen in the future. 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then, somebody say then. Then will appear from the heaven the sign of the Son of Man. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call. And they will gather his elect from the four winds. Now, folks, I'm just going to be really trying to be transparent with you. You can go online. You can go to the bookstore. You can go to a variety of places and find a difference of opinion than you're hearing from me. But in my opinion, the text is being very, very clear that Jesus is talking to his disciples, And he is warning them of things to come. Yea, he's even telling them, for the sake of the gospel, that they will be persecuted. They will be persecuted, and even some of them put to death during this period of time. And if I had time to unpack all of eschatology, I would go to the Revelation of John, the last book, chapter 7, where there are some of these who will be persecuted during that time, that John, in his apocalyptic kind of literature, his figurative language, is saying there are some people who are under the altar crying out, "How long, O Lord, do we have to wait?" And the response comes back to those people who are waiting in this place, not purgatory, in heaven. People who are waiting there, the response comes back. You have to wait here until the rest of those like you who will die, who will be persecuted, who will suffer and die, will be complete. In fact, these people are being somewhat comforted by their waiting until the rest of these people, God's people, are finished being persecuted, suffering, and die and join them. One of the reasons we need to understand this is that there's tough times of persecution coming. But I quickly go back for another word from Daniel, very quickly, just to bring about what you have there in your bulletin as we go back to Daniel chapter 11. I know you've got the AVs and CDs, and I put Matthew first, but I want to go back to Daniel. So when I go back to Daniel and I read 11:35, for instance, back to Daniel for my second reason of looking at this and seeing the coordination of Daniel and of Matthew together. I read this. The beginning of the sentence starts in 34, so I'll read it. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. Verse 35. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end. For it still awaits the appointed time. Whatever the bad stuff is happening, there's going to be some people who are falling away and going to divert. But there's going to be some who are wise. Some who are wise who escape? Is that what the text says? Does the text say that some who are wise are not going to? No. They're going to suffer right in there. But what's the reason now? The reason is that they might be purified. If we go over to 12:10 that you see there in your bulletin, we would read, many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And one thing I didn't tell you about these souls who are under the altar in the Revelation crying out, "How long, O Lord?" Do you know what they have on? They have white robes on. They've been clothed with white robes. When I hurry over to Matthew chapter 24 again, and I look at that verse 13 that's highlighted there in your bulletin, Matthew 24, I see that same kind of reason come up in Matthew's description of what's going on. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. The one who is purified, the one who is tried in the fire, the one who is put in that cooker and come out the way the Lord wants us, enduring to the end. But finally, flip back over. It's getting to the point where my Bible just flips to Daniel now. And there, back over there. Finally, I'm looking at that Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. We already read it once, but this I'm highlighting something else since it's a little longer. That time shall arise Michael, the great prince, in Daniel 12:1, who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble. There shall be a time of trouble, such has never been since there was a nation, till that time. But, I love that biblical word, but at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. There's victory. Why? Why this persecution? Why this study? That the name of Jesus might be high and lifted up and exalted above the heavens. Why go through? Look at Matthew is saying in 24:14. In Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world. Who are you preaching the gospel to? Who is preaching the gospel? If you think we're up and gone out of here, then I'm asking you who's preaching the gospel. And to whom are they preaching the gospel? And who is hearing the gospel and coming to know the Lord Jesus? And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. And then the end will come. You know, part of that testimony is that wonderful, I've been repeating it so often these days, in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, of that persecution that he explains throughout the entire book, that persecution that over in chapter 3, Paul is going to say, I count all things but loss. In chapter 2, he's saying that one day, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. That's what's happening in Matthew 24:14. This gospel proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. All the nations, all the people will see one thing. Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. And furthermore, I would say that we have an excellent opportunity, both in the environment in which we're living in tough times, I put that in quotes now, but in this period of time, to sing out the gospel more clearly than history could have ever done it before that time. Because if that persecution is worse than anything the world has ever seen, and we've seen some really bad things, but for the clarity of that diamond that is placed upon that horrible black backdrop of world history, that diamond of the gospel that I'm saying to you and to me this morning that we need to be at least prepared for. Pastor, are you saying that's going to happen in our lifetime? Pastor, are you saying that started right now? I'm not saying either one of those things. I'm not talking about the day and the hour and the time. But I am saying be ready. I am saying what the Bible says, be on your guard. For the thief comes when you think not. It's a warning. And to finish it over in verse 30 and 31, this is what he says. Then will appear in the heavens the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and he will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end to the other. Victory! Victory! In a world that is trying to tell you to escape from any harm, from any danger, from any sense of conflict in your life, I'm asking you not only to be prepared, I'm asking you to be a diamond on the black velvet. I'm asking you to see that as an opportunity to see the gospel shine more brilliantly than it could have possibly otherwise in all of human history. That's saying something huge. I think of Winston Churchill saying, just a few miles away are 70 million people who are coming to destroy us. There is no better time than right now to show your true colors. Now, he was talking patriotically. He was saying, Britons, now, to your factories and to your armaments, and be prepared. There's no better time for you to show your loyalty and patriotism. And I'm saying to you, Christian, whether it's right now in this situation in which we live, in which people are just still trying to dig their way out of an economic crisis, or whether it is those birth pangs beginning. Ladies, you're going to have to help the men out with what birth pains are. They don't happen in month 2. They don't happen in month 6. Birth pains, they happen when? Getting close. Getting close right here. Those birth pangs. When you see these things happening, it's getting close. I want to pray with you, and I want to pray that God would implant His Word in your life. Because this morning, I want you to receive it and to be hit with it, to gripped with it. Sorry for the metaphor, the example that's in my mind, but they didn't let me play football too long. 5'6", 135 pounds, just wasn't going to get it. But when I was in 8th grade, I still could play football, and I remember what it meant to line up for the opening kickoff. They hadn't hit anything yet, and to stand there is kind of at the halfback place, one on the front line, but back a little ways like that, and standing there seeing 11 guys who wanted to just annihilate me. But I remember the feeling and the thought that came. It wasn't, by God's grace, it wasn't turn in this direction and run that way as fast as I could. It was like in the midst of seeing this challenge in front, let me at it! Let me at it! Let me go! I can't wait for the first guy I get to get! Christian, where are you? Christian, where are you? In this world, in this life, right now, or in this persecution, whenever God designs that it starts. Where are you? I hope that many in this room, the sound of my voice, will say, because of the grace of God in you, let's take hell with a squirt gun. Yea, let's take Boynton Beach. Let's take Boynton Beach. We are in a spiritual warfare. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's a spiritual warfare. And it's here and it's present in our world. Now, where is somebody who says, run to it? Run. Stop all of this. The reason we don't do this is because of fear. I don't know what to say. Or I don't know. Oh, man. You know how to say hello to somebody. You know how to say, how are you doing today? You know how to say, didn't God make a great day? Come on. Run to it. Run to it. Run to the end. Knock it down. I don't know where that came from. Pray. Oh, Lord. Help us to hearken to your voice. That is, to listen to your voice. To hear the word of warning. Not to be knocked down or run in an opposite direction. You've told us a long time ago, and then you told us again in Matthew, and you said you told us beforehand, and we trust in you. We don't trust in our own flesh. We don't even have to do this in our own power or strength. Lord, I pray that you would apply this as a gospel warning, as a grace warning. That is a warning that we ought to take seriously, but not a warning that knocks us down and destroys us, but a battle cry that says, run to the battle. Get me there, that I might shine the exaltation of Jesus in my life, that I might shine the glories of His gospel. Lord, I pray that more and more people would ask each one of us in this room, how come you act that way? How in the world do you think that way? Lord, I pray that there would be a reason why we live by grace, and why we reflect it. That would be the hope that lies within us, that we're ready to give a defense. Lord, I pray for this in the victor's name, the one who is seated on the white horse, the one whose name written Lord of Lords and King of Kings is on his thigh. And he will be released one day to come again, and your angels will gather the elect. Even though Even so, come, Lord Jesus. Amen.